Have you ever wondered why your deepest acts of love feel like slow suicide? You thought you were healing, but what if you were just learning how to disappear more quietly? Carl Jung once said, "The most terrifying thing is to accept oneself completely." But here's what he didn't say. Sometimes we mistake self-erasure for self-love. What if your empathy isn't a gift, but a wound dressed up as wisdom? If this lands differently today, if something inside you just shifted, stay with me. Her name is Kathy, 34 years old, recently out of another relationship that left her questioning everything she thought she knew about love. She'd done the work: meditation retreats, therapy sessions, books on boundaries, all the words that taste like freedom but somehow still leave you hungry. And yet, here it is again, that familiar emptiness after giving everything. The way her chest feels hollow after every deep conversation. The guilt that creeps in when she chooses herself, even for a moment. She keeps attracting the same souls. Different faces, same hunger. They arrive broken, seeking her light. And she gives it, because that's who she is, right? The healer, the wise one, the person everyone turns to when life becomes too much. But late at night, when the world is quiet and her guard is down, a question haunts her. Why do I keep attracting people who feel like home and then consume me like I'm a resource? She's been calling it bad luck, calling it her type, calling it anything but what it actually is. The answer isn't what you think. It's deeper, more uncomfortable, and it will change everything once you see it. Because Kathy isn't just attracting these people by accident. She's calling them in. And until she understands why, the pattern will repeat until it breaks her. Kathy stares at her reflection in the bathroom mirror at 2 a.m., but she doesn't recognize the woman looking back. When did caring become carrying? When did love become labor? When did her own face become a stranger's? The woman in the mirror looks tired. Not just physically tired, soul tired. The kind of exhaustion that sleep doesn't touch because it comes from years of forgetting to include yourself in your own circle of care. Jung called it the persona, the mask we wear to survive the world. But what he discovered through the study of the Carl Jung Shadow goes deeper than social performance. Sometimes the most beautiful masks are the most dangerous ones. They're so convincing, even we forget they're not real. Kathy has been wearing the mask of the eternal giver for so long, she's forgotten what her actual face looks like underneath. You see, Kathy became empathic not just out of love. She became empathic out of necessity, out of survival. Picture a 6-year-old girl, small hands pressed against her bedroom door, listening to the storms outside. Not thunder and rain, but the chaos of adults who forgot how to hold their own pain. Her mother's crying. Her father's rage, the terrible silence that followed when words became weapons. In that moment, crouched in the dark, her nervous system made a choice that would shape the next 3 decades of her life. If I can feel what they feel, maybe I can fix what's broken. Maybe I can make it safe. Maybe they won't leave. And so, she learned to read the room before she read herself. She learned to absorb emotions like a sponge, to translate everyone's pain into something manageable. Her empathy became her early warning system, her survival tool, her way of staying loved. She became the family thermostat, constantly adjusting to keep everyone else comfortable. The little diplomat who could sense tension and dissolve it with a smile. The child who learned that her worth was measured by how well she could make others feel better. But survival strategies that save us as children become prisons as adults. The persona Kathy built was magnificent. The wise woman, the natural healer, the one who always knows what to say. Everyone called her an old soul. She became the person others turned to when life became too much. Friends would say, "I don't know what I'd do without you," and Kathy would glow with purpose. But Jung warned us about this. He said, everything that irritates us about others can lead us to an understanding of ourselves. The very people who drain Kathy, they're not accidents. They're mirrors reflecting back the parts of herself she's never learned to love. Her shadow, that disowned part of her psyche that lives in the darkness of unconsciousness, whispers a different truth. I give because I'm terrified of being left. I heal others because I don't know how to be loved without being useful. I disappear into their needs because my own needs feel too dangerous to have. Kathy has spent decades perfecting the art of disappearing into other people's needs. She's a master at making herself indispensable. She can sense what someone needs before they know it themselves. She can become exactly what the moment requires: therapist, mother, friend, savior. But here's the twist that Jung would recognize immediately. She's not attracting needy people by accident. She's attracting them by design. Her unhealed child self keeps broadcasting the same unconscious message: I am available for consumption. Use me to feel better about yourself. Take my light to illuminate your darkness. I won't ask for anything in return except please, please don't leave. And those who are hungry for light, they hear that message loud and clear. They're drawn to it like moths to flame. Not because they're evil, but because wounded people can sense a wound that matches their own. This is the split that's been tearing Kathy apart. Kathy the empath, the giver, the eternal healer, and Kathy the abandoned child who believes love must be earned through self-sacrifice. One lives in the light, admired and appreciated. Everyone loves this Kathy. She's the friend you call in crisis, the shoulder that's always available, the heart that seems infinitely spacious. The other lives in the shadow, feeding off being needed, terrified of being truly seen, secretly keeping score of every kindness given and every thank you not received. The irony? The very sensitivity that makes her beautiful is the same sensitivity that makes her a target. Not because she's too loving, but because she's still trying to love her way out of an old wound. She gives and gives and gives, but it never feels like enough. Because she's not actually giving from love, she's giving from terror. Terror of abandonment. Terror of being ordinary. Terror of discovering that maybe she's not as special as being needed makes her feel. Jung called this the transcendent function, the bridge between conscious and unconscious material. Kathy's consciousness tells her she's a natural healer, born to serve. But her unconscious knows the truth. She's addicted to being needed because being needed feels like being loved. And so the pattern continues. She attracts people who confirm her identity as the giver. People who take her emotional labor for granted. People who disappear when they no longer need her services. People who love what she does for them, but not who she actually is underneath all the doing. Because here's the secret Kathy doesn't want to face. She doesn't know who she is underneath all the doing. She's been performing empathy for so long, she's forgotten what authentic feeling feels like. The moment of reckoning comes on a Tuesday evening in November. Kathy sits in her car after another emotionally exhausting conversation with her friend Madison, a woman who only calls when her life falls apart, which happens to be every 3 weeks like clockwork. Tonight was different though. Tonight, Kathy noticed something she'd been refusing to see for months. As Madison poured out her latest crisis, another job she'd quit without notice, another man she'd driven away with her chaos, another financial emergency that somehow became Kathy's problem to solve. Kathy felt something she'd never allowed herself to feel before. Rage, not the quiet resentment she'd been swallowing for years, not the subtle irritation she'd been pushing down. Pure, clean, holy rage. Her hands are shaking, not from cold, but from finally allowing herself to feel the emotion she'd been forbidden to have since childhood. Good girls don't get angry. Empaths don't feel rage. Healers certainly don't resent the people they're supposed to love. But here she is, sitting in a Starbucks parking lot, finally letting herself feel what she's been denying. She's tired of being everyone's emotional dumping ground. She's tired of being the unpaid therapist for people who never ask how she's doing. She's tired of giving advice that never gets taken to people who don't want solutions. They want someone to manage their emotions for them. The question that changes everything emerges from the silence. What if I'm not attracting these people because I'm too loving, but because part of me needs to be needed? The silence that follows is deafening. Because in that moment, Kathy sees the truth she's been running from her entire adult life. Jung wrote, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate." Kathy has been calling it fate. this pattern of attracting emotional vampires, these relationships that feel like slow bleeds, this cycle of giving until there's nothing left but resentment and exhaustion. But it's not fate. It's a contract, an unconscious agreement written in childhood and renewed every time she prioritizes someone else's emotional state over her own. Here's the truth that will set you free and terrify you simultaneously. Empaths don't just attract broken people. They unconsciously seek them out. Because being needed feels safer than being wanted. Being useful feels more secure than being loved for who you are. And fixing others feels more manageable than facing the unfixed parts of yourself. Kathy sees it now, sitting in her car as the truth cuts through her like lightning. This invisible transaction she's been making her entire life. I will heal your pain if you promise not to leave. I will carry your darkness if you let me believe I'm good. I will disappear into your needs because my own needs feel too dangerous to have. The people who've drained her, they were never taking anything she didn't unconsciously offer. They were responding to an invitation she didn't even know she was sending. An invitation written in her body language, her energetic field, her desperate need to be necessary. Jung called this projection the unconscious transfer of our own inner dynamics onto others. Kathy kept attracting people who couldn't hold their own emotional world because she'd never learned to stop holding everyone else's. But here's where it gets deeper, where the psychological archaeology reveals layers of inherited trauma that Kathy never knew she was carrying. The archetype of the wounded healer runs through Kathy's bloodline like a river of pain. Her great-grandmother, who raised 7 children while her husband drank himself to death. Her grandmother, who sacrificed everything for ungrateful children who barely visit. Her mother, who loved men who couldn't love her back, who taught Kathy by example that women exist to fill the spaces men leave empty. A generational pattern of women who confused self-erasure with service, martyrdom with love, suffering with holiness. Kathy realizes she's been living out an inherited script that was never hers to begin with. Good women disappear. Holy women sacrifice. Worthy women earn love through suffering. Strong women don't need anything from anyone. But tonight, in this car, she sees the shadow truth she's been avoiding her entire life. She's addicted to being needed because being needed feels like being loved. She's addicted to fixing others because it distracts her from the terrifying work of facing her own brokenness. She's addicted to crisis because calm feels like abandonment. She's addicted to drama because peace feels like death. She's addicted to being useful because being valuable for who she is, not what she does, feels impossible. The most uncomfortable realization of all. Part of her has enjoyed being indispensable. Part of her has felt superior to the broken people she attracts. Part of her has been secretly proud of being the strong one, the wise one, the one who has it all together. Her empathy hasn't been pure. It's been mixed with ego, with secret pride, with the addictive high of being needed. She's been playing savior not out of love, but out of fear. Fear of being ordinary. Fear of being vulnerable. Fear of discovering she's just as flawed and needy as everyone else. But tonight, something shifts. The question isn't why she keeps attracting energy vampires. The question is, what would happen if she stopped being available for consumption? What would happen if she loved from overflow instead of obligation? What would happen if she said no without explaining herself? What would happen if she stopped being the soft place for others to fall, when she's the one who's been quietly bleeding for decades? The tears come then, not the familiar tears of exhaustion, but something deeper. Grief for the little girl who learned too early that love was conditional. Rage at the adults who taught her that her worth was measured by her usefulness. Sorrow for all the years she spent being everyone else instead of herself. And underneath it all, a terrifying but liberating realization. She is not responsible for other people's emotional worlds. She never was. This is the death of the false self, the beginning of individuation, the moment when the persona cracks open and something truer starts to emerge. But truth, as Jung knew, is not comfortable. It requires the courage to disappoint others in service of becoming real. It requires the willingness to be disliked by people who only loved your performance. Kathy sits in her car, feeling the weight of this revelation settle into her bones. Tomorrow, everything changes. But tonight, she grieves the woman she's been pretending to be and prepares to meet the woman she actually is underneath all the giving. 6 months later, Kathy is a different woman. Not because she's healed. Healing isn't a destination, but because she's finally willing to be honest about what healing actually requires. The first boundary felt like betrayal. Madison called, as she always did on Sunday nights, ready to pour out her latest crisis. Kathy could feel the familiar pull, the automatic shifting into therapist mode, the way her nervous system prepared to absorb whatever chaos was coming. But instead of sliding into the old pattern, Kathy said something revolutionary. "I'm not available for that conversation right now." The silence that followed was familiar. The shock people feel when their emotional supply suddenly gets cut off. But Kathy didn't rush to fill it with apologies or explanations. She let it exist, let it breathe, let Madison feel the discomfort of having to hold her own emotions for once. "What do you mean you're not available?" came the wounded response, tinged with that special kind of hurt that manipulators deploy when their strategy stops working. "I thought you cared about me." And there it was, the hook that had caught Kathy for years. The implication that caring and being endlessly available were the same thing. The suggestion that love required self-abandonment. The threat disguised as vulnerability. "If you don't carry my pain, you don't really love me." But Kathy had learned something that changed everything. You can care about someone without being responsible for their emotional experience. "I do care about you," she said, her voice steady despite the way her heart was racing. "That's why I'm not going to enable your pattern of avoiding professional help by using me as your unpaid therapist." The friendship didn't survive. Madison hung up that night and never called again. For years, Kathy would have chased that dial tone, would have called back with apologies, would have twisted herself into knots trying to repair the relationship. But for the first time in her adult life, Kathy felt relief instead of guilt. This is what Jung meant by individuation. The process of becoming who you actually are instead of who others need you to be. It's not selfish. It's necessary. Because a person who doesn't know where they end and others begin can't truly love anyone. Kathy started saying no to things that drained her and yes to things that fed her soul. She stopped explaining herself to people who weaponized her kindness. She began to see the difference between being loving and being convenient. The most shocking discovery? When she stopped being available for emotional dumping, she had energy left over for actual intimacy, real conversations, mutual exchange, relationships that felt like dancing instead of carrying. But the deeper work was just beginning. Kathy had to face the uncomfortable truth that Jung warned about. The shadow doesn't disappear when acknowledged. It transforms. And that transformation is the very essence of the Carl Jung Shadow, the integration of all the disowned parts of ourselves we've spent a lifetime avoiding. Her shadow wasn't her anger or her selfishness. Her shadow was her desperate need to be needed, her terror of being ordinary, her secret pride in being the strong one. She had to own the way she'd been complicit in her own exhaustion, how she trained people to treat her as a resource, how she confused being useful with being valuable, how she'd been addicted to the drama of constant rescue missions because it kept her distracted from her own inner landscape. The turning point came when she realized she'd been playing savior not out of love, but out of fear. Fear of being alone with herself. Fear of discovering she was just as flawed as everyone else. Fear of what might happen if she stopped performing emotional heroics and just existed. This is the paradox Jung spoke about. We must become conscious of our unconscious motivations if we want to choose differently. Kathy had to own her part in the patterns she'd been calling victimization. She wasn't just attracting users. She was unconsciously seeking out people who would confirm her identity as the giver. It was a symbiotic relationship. She needed to be needed as much as they needed to take. Learning to love from a different place required Kathy to develop what Jung called psychological sovereignty, the ability to be present with others without losing yourself in them. She started giving because she wanted to, not because she was terrified of what would happen if she didn't. She began to love from overflow instead of obligation, from choice instead of compulsion. The process wasn't smooth. There were days when the old patterns felt more comfortable than the new freedom. Days when she almost picked up the phone to call Madison back, to apologize, to return to the familiar prison of being needed. The guilt was overwhelming at first. A lifetime of conditioning doesn't disappear overnight. But Kathy had learned to distinguish between healthy guilt and manipulative guilt. Healthy guilt signals when we've actually done something wrong. Manipulative guilt is the weapon people use to maintain control over your choices. Kathy realized she'd been feeling guilty for things that weren't actually wrong. Having needs, setting boundaries, saying no, choosing herself, existing without constantly serving others. This wasn't guilt. This was the discomfort of breaking generational patterns. The new Kathy learned to recognize the red flags she used to call chemistry. That immediate intensity when someone sensed her empathic abilities. The way certain people's problems became urgently hers to solve. The feeling of being chosen by someone who was drowning. She now sees these for what they are, invitations to repeat old patterns. Real love, she discovered, doesn't feel like emergency medicine. It doesn't require her to set herself on fire to keep others warm. It doesn't ask her to disappear into someone else's needs while ignoring her own. Real love feels like coming home to yourself in the presence of another person. Today, Kathy sits in the same coffee shop where she used to meet friends who needed fixing. But everything is different now. The quality of silence inside her has changed. Where there used to be anxious scanning, reading the room, monitoring everyone's emotional temperature, preparing to manage whatever crisis might emerge, there's now a settled peace. She's learned the difference between empathy and absorption, between compassion and codependence, between love and fear dressed up as love. The woman across from her, Rachel, a new friend who doesn't know the old Kathy, is sharing something difficult about her divorce. Kathy listens with her whole heart, but she's not disappearing into the story. She's not trying to solve or save or carry what isn't hers to carry. She's simply present, witnessing, holding space without losing herself in the space. When Rachel asks, "What should I do?" Kathy doesn't automatically launch into advice mode. Instead, she asks, "What do you think you should do?" This is the new Kathy, not the woman who makes other people's problems her own, but the one who trusts others to find their own way while offering genuine support from a place of centeredness. The loneliness she feared never came. Well, it came at first. The inevitable emptiness that follows when you stop filling your life with other people's drama. But underneath that temporary loneliness was something she'd never experienced: solitude. Rich, nourishing, spacious solitude. For the first time in her life, Kathy enjoys her own company. She's no longer terrified of quiet moments or empty schedules. She's discovered that when you stop running from yourself, you find out you're actually quite good company. Her relationships have transformed too. The people who could only relate to her as a resource faded away naturally. What remained were connections based on mutual respect, shared interests, genuine care that flows both ways. Kathy has learned to recognize the early warning signs of emotional vampirism. The way certain people's energy changes when they see her coming. Not with joy, but with relief, like they've spotted their next emotional meal. The conversations that only go one direction. The crises that somehow always become her emergencies to solve. The immediate intensity that used to feel like chemistry, but was actually codependency. The way some people seemed to see her so deeply, but only saw the parts of her that could serve them. The relationships that felt profound, but were actually parasitic. But more importantly, she's learned to recognize the signs within herself. The old urge to rescue, the familiar pull toward drama, the way her nervous system still sometimes mistakes chaos for connection. She's developed what therapists call wise mind, the ability to observe her own patterns without immediately acting on them. When she feels that old familiar tug, the compulsion to solve someone else's crisis, to absorb their pain, to make their problems her own, she pauses. She breathes. She asks herself, is this love or is this fear? Am I responding or am I reacting? Is this my responsibility or am I trying to control an outcome I'm afraid of? The most profound shift is internal. Kathy no longer believes she has to earn love through suffering. She no longer mistakes being useful for being valuable. She's finally understood what Jung meant when he spoke about the transcendent function, the psychological mechanism that bridges the conscious and unconscious mind, allowing us to become whole. Kathy's light hasn't dimmed. It's simply no longer available for consumption. She shines because she is, not because others need her to. Her empathy flows from overflow, not from obligation. When people try to dump their emotional chaos on her now, she responds with loving boundaries. I can see you're in pain, and I care about you. Here's the number for a great therapist. No guilt, no apology, no taking responsibility for their reaction to her boundary. This is what Jung called individuation, the lifelong process of becoming who you truly are instead of who the world needs you to be. The work continues. It always will. But now it's conscious work, chosen work, sacred work. Kathy is no longer trying to heal others to avoid healing herself. She's doing her own inner work and letting her wholeness inspire others to do the same. This is true service. This is real love. This is what it means to stop feeding others with your light and start teaching them to kindle their own. If Kathy's story feels familiar, if it mirrors something you've been afraid to name, you're not alone. You're also not broken. You're waking up. The pattern of attracting people who feed on your light isn't a curse. It's a curriculum. Your soul has been trying to teach you something essential. That love without boundaries becomes consumption. That care without limits becomes codependence. That healing others while ignoring yourself becomes a beautiful form of self-destruction. This is the core lesson embedded in Carl Jung Shadow Work. That what we repress doesn't disappear, it dominates from the dark. And until we integrate the parts of us we've sacrificed to be loved, we keep reenacting the same pain in different costumes. Jung said, your vision becomes clear when you look into your heart. Who looks outside dreams. Who looks inside awakens. So let me ask you what Kathy learned to ask herself. What part of you still believes that love must cost you your light? Who benefits when you keep dimming yourself to make others comfortable? What would happen if you stopped being a soft place for people to fall when you're the one who needs catching? Take a moment and really feel into these questions. Notice what comes up. Is it fear? Guilt? A voice that says, but what if they leave? That voice isn't your wisdom speaking. It's your wound. Here's what I want you to understand. The empaths who thrive are not the ones who give endlessly. They're the ones who've learned to give consciously, selectively, from a place of fullness rather than fear. The ones who understand that saying no to what drains them is saying yes to what feeds their soul. The ones who know that disappointing others in service of their own truth is not cruelty, it's courage. You're not a healing station for broken souls. You're not a sponge for other people's pain. You're not a lighthouse that must burn itself out to guide others home. You are a sovereign being with your own inner light, your own sacred journey, your own healing to attend to. And when you honor that, when you stop abandoning yourself to save others, something magical happens. You become genuinely empathic instead of just empathically exhausted. You love from overflow instead of obligation. You attract people who want to dance with your light, not devour it. The person you've been waiting for, the one who will finally see your worth, who will care for you the way you care for others, who will love you without requiring you to disappear. That person is you. Stop looking for permission to choose yourself. Stop waiting for others to release you from contracts you never consciously signed. Stop believing that your worth is measured by your willingness to suffer for others. Choose yourself, not once, but again and again, until it no longer feels like rebellion but like coming home. Your light was never meant to be consumed. It was meant to guide, but first, it must guide you back to yourself. The journey continues, but now you walk it as yourself, whole, boundaried, sovereign, and finally free. If this video has shown you something you needed to see, something you've been feeling but couldn't name, honor that knowing. Your recognition of this truth is the first step toward reclaiming your authentic self. You're not too sensitive. You're not too much. You're simply ready to stop giving your light away and start letting it illuminate your own path home. The work begins now, and this time, you're not doing it alone. You're doing it as yourself.